Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at two different running shoes from Brooks. We have the Glycerin 22 as well as the Glycerin 22 GTS edition. Now that GTS stands for Go to Support, which means this is the stability version of the Glycerin 22. So we have the neutral version and the stability version. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Brooks has a ton of different running shoes, so I'll do my best to put the Glycerin into perspective. We'll start with the Ghost, which is their traditional, kind of more moderately cushioned neutral daily trainer. If you want a bit more stack height, then that's where the Glycerin comes in. And of course, we have the neutral and stability edition. And then if you want even more cushioning, or the most amount of cushioning you can get out of a Brooks running shoe, then we have the Glycerin Max, as that's an ultra max cushion neutral daily trainer. But for today, we're just taking a look at the Glycerin 22 and the Glycerin GTS or Stability Edition. Brooks will add that GTS or Go to Support tag to the end of some running shoe names to indicate that it's a stability daily trainer. And I'll kind of break down the differences between these two models as we talk about their midsoles later on in the review. Something else I forgot to mention is there's actually a Stealth Fit edition of the Glycerin 22 original. So essentially you have the same midsole platform. However, the upper is going to be a slightly more snug knit material, has a more sock-like fit. So that is another option if you want to kind of mix up the upper and get something that fits just a little bit more snug around your foot. Both shoes are priced at $165. That is a $5 increase compared to the Glycerin 21. I believe the stack height remains unchanged. Both shoes have 38 millimeters in the heel and 28 in the forefoot for a 10 millimeter heel to toe drop. The original edition is slightly lighter, coming in at 10.2 ounces, while the Stability or GTS edition comes in at 10.7, so roughly half an ounce more. The original shoe does get slightly heavier compared to the Glycerin 21. I think the 21 was 9.8 ounces, and again, this comes in at 10.2, so a small increase with regard to overall weight. Moving on to the uppers, I believe they're both identical between the Stability and Neutral edition. I gave them a thorough examination, and I cannot see or feel a difference, so I'm going to say they are the exact same. The upper material is a double jacquard mesh, which actually I think is more breathable compared to what we saw last year here on the 21, which had a more closed off knit experience. Now I'd say the breathability, if you kind of compare it to other running shoes, is about average, kind of what you expect out of a traditional engineered mesh, even though this is a double jacquard mesh. As far as the fit goes, I thought both shoes were true to size and fairly accommodating. Sometimes I have issues with Brooks's toe boxes. I found them to be sometimes too pointed, and that was not the case here. I thought they had a decent amount of room. They're not super wide, but again, didn't feel overly restricted towards the top of the shoes, which I think is a nice change, at least in my opinion. And then if we go on to the tongue, it has a high level of padding, a very plush premium experience. I really like it. The tongues are not gusseted. I'm not sure why Brooks doesn't gusset their tongues. I think the only Brooks shoe I know that's gusseted is like their racing model and then like Hyperion Max 2. So not sure why that is, but the tongue does a great job. It does have a tongue pull tab, which you get your finger under and kind of use to get everything situated. I thought it was quite comfortable. And then if we go towards the back of the shoe, it's kind of funny. This almost looks like the Nimbus with this kind of like knit collar and large stretchy pull tab. Very familiar looking. The heel counter itself is incredibly stiff and rigid on both the neutral and GTS edition, which is important. It kind of helps with the overall stability and making sure your foot doesn't move around too much. And then there's tons of padding in the ankle and Achilles section as well. A very kind of plush premium experience here. Really happy with the lockdown. Feels kind of what you would expect from a Brooks running shoe, and does get maybe a little bit more breathable compared to what we saw last year. And then for the midsole, which has been completely redesigned here on the 22nd edition, they're using something called DNA tuned. This technology was debuted on the Glycerin Max, and then they kind of brought that technology down to the original Glycerin. Now, what is DNA tuned? Well, it's still a nitrogen infused foam, similar to what we saw last year on the 21. However, it's different densities of nitrogen infused foam, which have been manufactured to be a lot more seamlessly integrated with each other. There's no fusing of different foams together. Essentially, they have this block of material which has the different densities of foam ready to go. They put it through the nitrogen infused process. It expands and gives us the midsole we have here. You can actually see the different kinds of foam. If you flip it over to the outsole, this colorway is a little bit difficult to see it on, but you have this white foam kind of peeking through the outsole rubber, and that is going to be a smaller cell nitrogen-infused foam, which is going to be a bit more responsive, while the rest of the black foam has a larger cell nitrogen-infused material, which is going to be softer. So you basically have a softer back portion of the shoe and a slightly more responsive front portion of the shoe, which is supposed to be optimized for when you're running. So when you're toeing off, you don't have an overly mushy experience. You have something with a little bit more resiliency and a pop to it. So I hope that makes sense. Long story short, you have a nitrogen infused foam with a softer back half and a more responsive forefoot. And then if we take a look at the GTS or Stability Edition, there is some unique geometry construction that gives you that guidance. Now, on the lateral side, they extended the midsole up to give you a lateral foam sidewall. And on the medial side, they added this kind of chunk of more dense foam to give you even more medial support. So if your foot tends to roll in, you're going to have a lot more support on that medial side. And then you have that lateral wall to kind of keep you going the correct direction. So essentially 2 walls of foam that keep your foot from over pronating or rolling inwards and try to give you a gentle level of guidance. And I think that was my experience with this shoe. Now with these guide rails implemented into the midsole, I will say the GTS edition is going to be a lot more stiff and rigid. This doesn't have a whole lot of flex to it, while the original edition has a lot more bend and twist. It's going to be more flexible, which makes sense. You want your stability shoe to have a lot more structure to it, and that is absolutely the case between these two models of the same kind of shoe. One other small difference I actually noticed between these two shoes, other than the guide rails, is the outsole traction pattern. They look very similar. However, if you take a look at the midfoot section, you'll notice with the orange outsole or the stability shoe, the rubber comes in a little bit closer to the center of the outsole, while that does not appear to be the case on the original Glycerin 22. So I think they did this to give you slightly more structure here on the Stability Edition. I'm not sure how much difference this added bit of rubber makes, but I will say, again, this shoe has a lot more stiffness to it compared to its neutral counterpart. So how does this new midsole implementation feel while running? Well, I'm actually quite impressed by what Brooks has done here. It's not perfect, but I do think they have a winner on their hands. This implementation or setup of DNA Loft nitrogen infused foam does a good job of giving you an excellent level of impact protection and squish without being overly mushy. It doesn't feel like you're able to bottom out the midsole. It doesn't feel dead underfoot. It has a solid level of resiliency to it. It's not the most energetic midsole out there, but I do think it provides a very pleasant underfoot feel. And then if you go towards the front of the shoe, where Brooks says the more responsive portion of their small-celled nitrogen-infused foam is, it just feels a bit firmer compared to the rest of the shoe. The midfoot and heel has a lot more squish and compression to it. Now, this is probably one of the small critiques I have of this shoe. I was hoping for maybe a bit more energy turn or resiliency out of the forefoot. It is firmer and I'd say more responsive than the rest of the midsole. I would just like maybe a little bit more pop or energy return from the front portion of the shoe. It's a small complaint. I really do think that the midsole has a nice feel and ride to it, but when Brooks says, you have a kind of this DNA tune setup, I was hoping for a bit more pop out of the front of this option. And then if we take a look at the GTS or Stability Edition, it feels very similar to its neutral counterpart. However, there are a couple key differences. The first thing is I do think the GTS edition feels slightly firmer, and that's partially because of the large medial support insert on the side of the shoe, restricts the foam, and makes things feel, again, just a touch firmer. And then keeping with that same story, the GTS edition, I touched on this before, is much more stiff and rigid. That's something you absolutely notice. It makes the original or neutral version feel a little bit more, I guess, seamless or just kind of more smooth, if you will, when you're running in it. But that's kind of the price you pay with a stability shoe because you want that additional support. I actually took the GTS edition out for my long run just to feel how these stability mechanisms would interact with my foot over a long period of time. I was actually pleasantly surprised. They weren't overly intrusive, didn't create any kind of pain points or anything. Again, you definitely notice the shoe has a little bit more rigidity and isn't as smooth compared to the original version, but it didn't really create any pain or any uncomfortable experiences. I was actually quite kind of pleased with how this performed, just spending a ton of time in it. So does Brooks have a winner on their hands? Well, I'll say yes, especially if you're coming from the 21 to the 22, mainly because I think you'll appreciate the additional breathability in the upper and the midsole having slightly more resiliency and a more dynamic feeling to it. Now, the drawbacks to the shoe, at least in my opinion, are I wish the forefoot had a little bit more energy return and pop to it, especially because that's how it was marketed, and it continues to feel kind of like a classic, tried and true Brooks nitrogen-infused daily trainer. There are some more exciting and more energetic midsoles out there, but for somebody who's looking for kind of a reliable go-to and pleasant ride, I think the Glycerin 22 definitely gets the job done, and I will say it's probably one of my favorite Brooks running shoes. That and probably like the Hyperion Max 2. I really like those models. And then if we take a look at the GTS edition, if you're someone who wants some more stability, I think this definitely kind of fits that particular need, especially with the guide rail. It's going to give you a little bit more rigidity and stiffness without being overly intrusive. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Brooks Glycerin, or would you rather go to the Glycerin Max? I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.